Welcome back to another FPWellman Unfiltered story. And this one actually gets to why it's called FPWellman Unfiltered. And a lot of people think I call the newsletter and these videos unfiltered because I'm unfiltered, which what makes people laugh is if you follow me, well, I'm always unfiltered. That's actually part of the challenge. So it really comes from cider, believe it or not. So the hard cider that I enjoy so much. If you're a reader of the newsletter, you know that every episode at the end, every newsletter, at the very bottom, I talk about what I'm drinking. And I think 9 times out of 10, it's a hard cider. And why hard cider? Well, like every great story, it starts with, something stupid. So I got into the hard cider world over 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, living in Virginia at the time. Now, where does this whole story start? Well, it starts with a pig named Wilbur. So I just retired from the Army, and we lived out in the country. We had 4 acres out in the country. We had 2 horses, pretty good life. My daughter at the time, who was 12, I suppose, really wanted to have a Vietnamese pot-bellied pig for the farm. I was like, whatever, and it's a farm. We could do that. Yeah, so we got ourselves a pot-bellied pig named, of course, Wilbur, because, of course. So Wilbur the pig lived at the house. But the thing about little pot-bellied pigs is they're like puppies, right? Wilbur didn't live out in the farm or outside. He lived in the house. Well, not long after we got him, I actually started my own business. And I started my business in the basement of our house, a house with hardwood floors. Well, if you've ever been around a pig, pigs have hooves, and pot-bellied pigs run around like puppies. And so I would be trying to work in my basement, and Wilbur the pig would be pounding up and down above my head. And the thing about pigs is they wake up at 5 a.m. or so really freaking hungry, and they squeal till they get fed. So in the end, Wilbur the pig ended up being a giant pain in my butt. So we compromised, and we found a rescue organization. You can't make this up. A rescue organization in the mountains of Virginia. I think it was in Albemarle County, out in the mountains of Virginia, where they take, dolts like us who pick up a pot-bellied pig, and they'll take them there, and they're vegans, which is, which was great, except I used to call the pig barbecue because he liked to roast himself in front of he had a space heater, and I used to say that he was self-barbecuing, which wasn't a funny joke to the vegans, but nonetheless. So we took Wilbur the pig out to a farm rescue in the mountains, and it was wonderful. He had pig friends and got fed real well. We paid for like a year. We paid to actually board him and feed him, and of course we had to go visit Wilbur the pig. So one weekend, it was the anniversary of 9/11. It was the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 in 2011, and we decided to go out and visit Wilbur because my ex-wife at the time and my kids knew it's not a bad idea for me to take time away from things on 9/11 and those kind of holidays. So we head out to the mountains of Virginia and visited Wilbur the pig. And on the way back, we passed a place. I saw the sign for a place called Albemarle Cider Works. Cider. And I was like, ooh, cider. I grew up in Missouri. Cider to a Missourian is that fall drink. It's cloudy, fresh pressed apple juice that you get in the big jugs. You remember the big plastic jugs? It sounded like a fun kid thing to do, so we decided to stop at this cider company in the fall. And what we found was not what we expected. What we found was a place that looked like a wine tasting room that was serving hard cider in wine bottles. And it was very dry, really good, and unlike anything I'd ever drank before. And as we talked to the tasting room folks, we discovered that Albemarle cider at that point had been open about 2 years. And the family's history is fascinating. They had a farm there in Albemarle County. They had planted some orchards of apples. The kids had gone to an apple cider demonstration at Monticello in 2000, and that's when a guy was demonstrating what many people now know, the colonial drink. And that's the thing about cider. Hard cider was the original American drink. There's only 2 native apples in America, so when the colonists came over from England, where they made cider, they brought apples, and now we have hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties of apple. A little known fact is that when you plant an apple seed from an apple, you don't get the same apple. It's a different variety that grows out of that. So the way you create the same variety of apple over and over is actually by splicing the trees together. So it's really a just a giant pain in the ass of a fruit, but nonetheless. And so I just fell in love with this stuff. I'd never had anything like it. By that point, beer didn't agree with me very well, so I started drinking cider. And then a year later, a company called Bold Rock was built by a UVA, University of Virginia business professor. He recruited a cider maker from New Zealand to come to Virginia and build a huge cider works in not far from Albemarle, over the mountains in Nellisford, Virginia. They built a beautiful tasting room and started making really good drinkable ciders. And their style was more of the way and now it's not proper terminology, but more of a drinking cider, a beer cider, if you will. You get it in a can or a bottle, and it's usually sweeter. They don't ferment as much of the apple sugars out of the cider, so it's a little bit sweeter. Whereas a more wine style, they ferment most of the sugars into alcohol. So it's a little bit higher alcohol content, and it's drier. And that's what apple cider is, basically apple wine. So I fell in love with these two brands, and then it just became a thing. As I traveled the country or Virginia, I would visit cider works. I've probably been to at least 30 or 40 cider makers. I actually went to a trip to Seattle a couple of years ago at Christmas time, or in between Christmas and New Year's. I usually do like a little sabbatical every year, and I was either hiking or I was visiting cider works. So Washington State, New York State, and Virginia are three of the biggest states for the new resurgence of the cider industry since 2010, 2009, which really come on strong. And so you may know cider from Angry Orchard or Cidre, which is the Stella version. They're fine. Those brands tend to add a little bit more added sugar than a more traditional style of brand. So if you've only tried those, you might find them very, very sweet. I tell you, if you can find a local maker right here in St. Louis, there's a wonderful brand called Brick River, which I'm a huge fan of. They do an unfiltered. If you're in Boston, I recommend Down East. Down East is right there on the harbor near the airport. Two guys, college buddies, and their brothers created a cider company that specializes in more of an unfiltered cider. So it's a little cloudier, but it's got a real robust flavor to it. It has a lot of depth to it. But I think what you find is, I hope from my newsletter at the end, you're finding some really cool ciders. Another one of my favorites is a company called Patois in Virginia. It's a gentleman who actually learned to make cider, I believe, at Albemarle, believe it or not. They have really seeded the cider industry. And this gentleman does foraged apples. He will pick a side of a mountain in Virginia, and he'll climb around the mountain or go to an old orchard and forage for a truckload of apples, and make bushels of apples, and he'll make one run of a cider. It's a wine style with champagne yeast. First time I was served it at my favorite restaurant, I thought they gave me Chardonnay. It was so dry, but remarkably diverse, remarkably depth of flavor that is different. So that's the story of Fred and cider that some of you see. It's even the story of FPWellman Unfiltered. So who knows? Maybe someday when our politics settles down in this country and the next phase of my life, this will just be a pure cider stand account, and I'm okay with that. They could use some help in the industry, and not enough people are drinking cider today, but that's my story with cider. So pick some up for the holidays, and if I don't get back to you before that, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday. I really appreciate you following along this little adventure of ours, and take care of each other. Thanks.